private school.
One thing that differentiates hip-hop from other genres of music, for the most part, is the fact that it's incredibly competitive.
Mouty, here, tell these people something they don't know about me.
While musicians from other genres have had disagreements in the past, and even have written songs about one another, like the John Lennon or Paul McCartney beef, for the most part they communicate their dislike in a more subtle fashion than those in the hip-hop realm. Diss tracks are an integral part of hip-hop, at least before the YouTube generation, as battles are part of coming up through the hip-hop communities that people used to have to partake in before getting their shine or deal. Despite the fact that the internet has completely changed that dynamic, diss tracks are still an integral part of the hip-hop community, to the extent that people often compare the rap game to the WWE world.
You run your mouth, you little jabroni, Rudy Poo.
However, there were periods where diss tracks could get you hurt or even killed. So let's take a look at the top 10 diss tracks of all time in terms of quality and consequence. 50 Cent, Ja Rule Duets. 50 Cent released so many diss tracks against Ja Rule that it was hard to choose just one for this video. And while there are many examples of 50 eviscerating Ja,
I can't even see how a kid could look at Ja Rule and want to be like.
There really was no better example of a diss completely ending someone's career than the Ja Rule duet tracks from G-Unit's G-Unit radio mixtape series. They aren't diss tracks per se, but they're so hilarious that they'll basically turn any ardent Ja Rule fan into a 50 fan in the time it takes to listen to them. The tracks team up the world's best Ja Rule impersonator with a cadre of pop songs from back in that era.
Like this. To me.
Showing the formula of cheesy R&B rap melding that Ja made popular before 50 signed with Shady in Aftermath. Liking this video so far? Take a second to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Eminem, The Sauce, Nail in the Coffin. Benzino is a rapper who has been in the game basically forever, and somehow he weaseled his way into running The Source, which is at one point referred to as hip-hop's Bible. He used that platform to attack Eminem, after years of throwing shade his way, especially because Eminem was hyper-popular and Benzino felt like he was appropriating hip-hop culture. While that might have played a lot better these days, it basically ended up looking like haterism back in the early aughts, and everyone in hip-hop co-signed Eminem. These tracks show Shady at his peak, around the time of 8 Mile, before drugs completely ruined his creativity. It was also nice to see Eminem diss another rapper. After years of attacking easy targets like NSYNC and Britney Spears, Eminem came up as a battle rapper after all, and you can really tell that here, as he basically exposes Benzino to the point that you almost feel bad for the guy. The Notorious B.I.G., Long Kiss Goodnight. Lyrically and in terms of flow, Biggie Smalls' Long Kiss Goodnight should be at or near the top of this list. The beat, his wordplay, it shows why Biggie, who had only ever released one album at the time of his death, is considered to be one of the best rappers of all time.
Don't be a stupid rapper.
However, this diss loses points because it was released after the death of its target, Tupac Shakur, which, if you're adding and removing points to these songs based on consequence, means that Biggie basically was afraid to release anything while Tupac wasn't resting where the worms and the weak be. The unedited version of this track, while obviously bootleg in quality, is better than the version that was released on Biggie's Life After Death, mainly because it has Puff Daddy going ballistic at the end, a la Tupac's Hit 'Em Up, and essentially bragging about Bad Boy's involvement in the death of Tupac.
I make your mouthpiece obese like Della Reese. When I release, you lose teeth like Little C.
Biggie also spit these lyrics on a radio station in Los Angeles a day or two before his death, which is just beyond ironic and proves that Biggie and Puff weren't the innocent victims of Tupac's wrath like most people believe they are or were. 50 Cent, Funeral Music. 50 Cent's a master manipulator, and while he came up by basically destroying other people's careers, he moved away from beefing after his second album. So it's hard to say that the guy who blew up thanks to the single How to Rob wasn't the actual instigator of this beef, but as 50 says at the beginning of Funeral Music, I was being nice to him. This beef all started when 50 was in studio at Hot 97, and he was basically talking smack about Koch Records, which was a record company run by a man named Alan Grunblatt. Grunblatt ended up calling into Hot 97 to defend his label, and he had Cameron in his office with him. Cam eventually hopped on the phone and started arguing with Fifth about Lloyd Banks and Mobb Deep sales numbers, which prompted 50 to say that Koch was a graveyard. That's where the idea of Funeral Music came up. This song is great because it's just fun to listen to, which is something 50 used to be the king at, making super catchy songs and hooks. Tupac, Against All Odds.
overthrow the government y'all got right now, which is Bad Boy and Nas and all that bullshit, and we will bring a new government.
In this song, which ended up being the final song in what is arguably Tupac's best work, the Don Killuminati, the 7-Day Theory, Machiavelli goes directly after the men who actually shot him. The song starts with guns blasting while Pac raps 21 Gun Salute, which merges into the chorus, which contains the word, "This be the realest shit I ever wrote." Based on the emotion you can feel in Tupac's voice, it really was. Besides Tut and Jack, Tupac goes after Nas, Dr. Dre, and Puff Daddy too, in what listens more like an angry speech than a set of bars, and we mean that in the best way possible. The Machiavelli album wasn't appreciated by critics at the time, but the album is a gem, and it's like listening to the mindset of a 25-year-old superstar who's both angry and scared, and thus struggling with all the ancillary emotions that come from that. It's easily a top 5 album of all time in the hip-hop genre, and Against All Odds is one of the best cuts from it. Ice Cube, No Vaseline.
I do it everywhere! Stop shaming me! You're not the victim here!
No Vaseline was released as part of Cube's second solo album, Death Certificate, and immediately shook the rap game to its core. However, it wasn't really the preemptive strike that people think it was today. Instead, it was Cube's response to comments that NWA had made about him on a few of their albums. In those songs, they refer to Cube as B.A., short for Benedict Arnold. This was a bad idea. Cube was essentially the heart and mind of NWA, and thus was way more equipped to handle a beef than people like Dre or Eazy-E, as neither wrote as much of their own material. Cube destroyed NWA, but saved most of his wrath for Eazy, mocking him for meeting with President Bush and other Republicans, as well as Eazy and Heller's relationship and their jealousy of his newfound freedom. It turns out that Cube was right, as Dr. Dre left not too long after that, after he discovered that E and Heller had been keeping most of the money for themselves. While this song gets credit for influencing a lot of the songs in this video, it probably should get credit for also creating Death Row, since Dre clearly learned something from this track and ended up looking into his own finances. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to you. One thing that's for sure is that it ended up creating a ton of classic music.
It's kind of weird to be associated with Glenn Miller.
Jay-Z's Supa Ugly. The thing about the takeover that makes it so spectacular, outside of the line about putting a condom on the car seat of Nas's baby mama, is the fact that Jay released it after he got bodied by Nas's track Ether, and somehow ended up winning over time. Like other songs in this video, context is important, and the context here was that Nas was essentially washed up at the time of this beef. Because of that, no one expected any sort of anything resembling fire from Nas, or even a response in general. That's why Jay was so confident and cocky, as he was on the top of the world and Nas was already being talked about in the past tense alongside other talented rappers like Rakim. So when Ether dropped, people couldn't believe it. It was like having a kid wake up from a coma, uppercut Mike Tyson, and knock him down. Sure, he wasn't completely out, but the crowd was so amazed that it quickly joined the side of the kid. People thought that Jay was done, and so he was kinda stuck between a rock and a hard place when he released this track. It was so brutal that even his own mother called him and told him to apologize and remove the line about the condom from the song. You know it's real when mom gets involved.
You ran into my son? You didn't see him? You didn't see him?
Nas, Ether. Speaking of which, there's Ether, a song that's so brutal that its title not only became a verb, but that has also been covered or redone by countless rappers of various levels of fame. The most recent and perhaps apt example of this was Remy Ma's Sheather, a diss song directed towards Nicki Minaj that, regardless of who wrote it, actually damaged the career of Nicki more than Ether did of the nigh billionaire Jay-Z. Either way, Ether was a direct response to Jay's disrespect on the track The Takeover, a song that was subjectively lazy and the definition of the pride before the fall. While Jay bounced back with a vengeance on Supa Ugly, some think it was too little too late. The great thing that came from this feud was that it lit a fire under the ass of Nas, whose Stillmatic album was his best in years. The best line? It's really hard to say, but the Camel line is always popular, as is the
You 36 in a karate class, you Tabo ho.
Regardless of where you stand on who won this beef, you have to admit that this line is hilarious. It's hard not to miss the good old days of hip-hop. Eminem, The Warning. It may be blasphemous to list anything that Eminem did above Nas's Ether, especially considering that Eminem was dissing Mariah Carey and Nick Cannon,
Baby girl,
two people who couldn't defend themselves lyrically.
I'm Mary Poppins, baby.
However, it was the way that this song worked that makes it so highly ranked in this video. And to explain that, You'll need some context. Eminem claims to have dated Carrie around the time of his Marshall Mathers LP. What makes the warning so great is the fact that Eminem uses the recorded voice of Carrie during the bridge
I want you.
and end of the song
I think you cute, right?
to show that they clearly had some sort of relationship, as she was recording both songs and voicemails with and to M. Beyond that, the way that her voice is used is actually really catchy and shows that Eminem's brain just works on a different level than most mere mortals. Just think about what it'd take to listen to a recording of someone talking and then taking certain parts of that recording and making a song all built around it. It's hard to explain,
Nice.
so you should probably just listen to the track, but apparently the warning worked, as neither Carrie nor Cannon responded, and both very well could have. After all, their platforms were big enough. Tupac, Hit 'Em Up. There are diss tracks, and then there's Hit 'Em Up. This song took the idea of diss tracks to an entirely new level, as it wasn't really about the lyrics as much as the emotion and facts behind the lyrics. There's a reason that the East Coast-West Coast beef was such a big deal back around 1996, and it's because Tupac and Biggie were the two best rappers of all time. They were both in their primes, and they also used to be friends, which makes the entire thing feel so Shakespearean. Tupac was shot 5 times at a recording studio in New York, and while both Puff Daddy and the Notorious B.I.G. denied having any knowledge of the shooting, as we've learned in recent years, they definitely did, or at least Puff did. While Tupac was shot because of the interviews he'd given outside of the courtroom during his trial for rape, the people responsible were hanging out with Puff and Big that night, namely Jimmy Henchman Rosemond. Beyond that, Biggie released Who Shot Ya while Tupac was in prison and didn't visit the rapper either. Those were both bad looks for someone who was supposed to be your friend. So when Tupac was released from jail, he took no prisoners, and ended up releasing Hit 'Em Up, a song that starts with Pac bragging about sleeping with Biggie's estranged wife, Faith Evans, who appeared on Tupac's album All Eyes on Me. Beyond that, it's just an amazing example of someone flipping the melody of another song to diss them, like a really angry Weird Al Yankovic song. The outro is what really makes the track, as it shows the anger that Tupac had, and while some think that that anger is misguided, the truth is that Tupac had a reason to be that angry. We'd never diss you, so hit that subscribe button and notification bell, and while you're here, check out our other great videos.